You probably use medical devices every single day, maybe from a simple bandage to perhaps something a bit more complex like an oximeter or even an implanted device.
Hmm.
But have you ever stopped to think about how these vital tools are regulated, to ensure their safety and effectiveness? It's quite a complex world behind the scenes, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And, well, it all starts with how these devices are defined and classified. That initial decision, as we're about to sort of dig into, isn't just paperwork.
Right.
It's really a strategic pivot point for innovation and, crucially, patient safety.
Exactly. So our mission today is to take a deep dive into that foundational first step of medical device regulation here in the United States.
Mm.
Basically, how the FDA defines and classifies these essential tools.
That's right.
And by the end of this deep dive, you'll hopefully have a clear understanding of the FDA's risk-based classification system, why it matters so much, and how it really shapes the entire development roadmap for medical devices.
Yeah, we'll be pulling insights from, the official Code of Federal Regulations, expert analysis, and plenty of real-world examples to guide us.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we start? The definition.
Yes, exactly. What's crucial to understand right from the outset is that the FDA legally defines a medical device very differently from a drug.
Oh.
The core distinction really lies in their primary mode of action. So devices achieve their intended purpose through physical or mechanical means.
Oh, okay. So think of something like a stethoscope or maybe a pacemaker.
Precisely. They work through physical presence or mechanical function within the body. They aren't achieving their primary purpose through chemical action within or on the body or being metabolized.
Right, right. That's the key drug differentiator. They're not being metabolized.
Exactly.
So this distinct regulatory framework for devices really emphasizes product safety, performance, and quality throughout the device's entire life cycle. It makes perfect sense, really, for ensuring safety.
It does. And here in the U.S., the FDA primarily oversees medical device regulation through its Center for Devices and Radiological Health, or CDRH.
CDRH. Got it. They're the main players.
They're basically the central hub for all things medical device at the FDA.
So once the FDA has this definition, how do they categorize devices? I mean, I imagine not all devices pose the same level of risk, right?
Yeah.
And that must fundamentally change the whole process.
You've absolutely hit on a critical point. Devices are sorted into three main classes, class 1, 2, and 3, and it's all based on their potential risk to patients and the level of control needed to ensure safety and effectiveness.
Okay, 3 classes.
And you're right, the regulatory control, the requirements, they increase significantly as you go from class I up to class 3.
So this sounds like a really foundational decision. It dictates the whole path forward for a company and its product.
It truly is. This initial classification determines the entire regulatory pathway. It dictates what testing is required, whether you need clinical trials, which pre-market submission type you'll use, like a 510K, a PMA, or maybe a de novo request. Wow.
This isn't just about ticking a regulatory box. It's a fundamental strategic decision. I mean, choosing to classify your device as Class 3, for instance, might mean committing to years of clinical trials, potentially hundreds of millions in R&D.
Yeah, that fundamentally shapes your budget, your timeline, even your market entry strategy. It's where innovation meets, well, practical business reality.
Exactly.
And it sounds like risk management is just built into this entire process from day one. How deeply integrated is it?
Oh, it's absolutely foundational. The FDA expects risk management, often guided by international standards like ISO 14971, to be embedded in both the design and the manufacturing stages.
Okay.
It's a systematic approach. You identify hazards, estimate and control the risks, and this ties directly into device validation. It guides decisions on changes or complaints throughout the device's entire life cycle. It's really a continuous loop of ensuring safety.
A continuous loop. Okay, so let's start at the bottom then. The lowest risk category. What is that and what does it mean for manufacturers? That would be Class 1. These devices pose the lowest potential risk to patients. They're subject to what the FDA calls general controls.
General controls. Okay, what does that mean practically?
These are the basic regulatory requirements applicable to all medical devices. Things like registering your establishment, listing your devices, proper labeling, and adhering to the quality system regulation, though with some exceptions.
And what about getting them to market? What do these general controls mean for pre-market submission? Is there a lot of, red tape?
Surprisingly little for most of them. Most Class I devices are actually exempt from pre-market submission.
Exempt, so no 5 and 10K, no PMA.
For the majority, that's correct. They don't require that level of pre-market scrutiny because the risk profile is considered low and managed by those general controls.
Okay, so give us some real-world examples then from the sources. What falls into this lowest risk category? Maybe something that might surprise us.
Sure, think of everyday items like bandages or manual stethoscopes. Those are classic Class I.
Right. Makes sense.
But also some more specific devices, like a staphylococcal typing bacteriophage.
Whoa, a bacteriophage, a virus. That's
Yeah.
class Y.
Yep. It's a bacterial virus used to identify pathogenic staph bacteria, mostly for epidemiological information. Because its intended use and risk profile fit, it lands in Class 1.
Wow, okay. That definitely broadens my understanding of what low risk can mean. It's not just simple tools.
Indeed. Other examples include things like an erythrocytic glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase assay that measures enzyme activity for diagnosing a type of congenital anemia,
Okay.
or a galactose test system used for diagnosing galactosemia in infants. Even beta or gamma counters for clinical use, which detect radiation in clinical samples, can be Class I.
Huh. Any dental examples in this category? I know you mentioned dental earlier.
Absolutely. An electrode gel for pulp testers that's applied to a tooth surface to help conduct electrical current, that's Class On, so is a dental x-ray film holder. Or a cement dispenser, which is like a non-powered syringe device for placing bone cement into surgical sites.
Right. So even a relatively simple tool, if it has a specific medical purpose, gets classified.
Exactly.
Now, we've touched on the quality system regulation, the QSR, before in other deep dives. It sounds incredibly robust. How early does that framework kick in, even for these lower risk devices?
That's a good question. While some non-sterile Class I devices might get a pass on certain parts of the QSR, that's 21 CFR Part 820, they still can't skip the basics.
Ah, okay.
They are still required to adhere to general record-keeping requirements, Section 820.180, and maintain robust complaint files under 820.198. So accountability is definitely expected across the board, even for the lowest risk class.
Got it. Accountability from the start. Okay, so we've covered the basics with Class 1, but what happens when a device steps up the risk ladder a bit? What new layers of scrutiny does the FDA add for these Class 2 devices?
Right, Class 2 devices. These pose a moderate risk to patients. For these, general controls alone aren't considered sufficient to assure their safety and effectiveness.
Okay, so they need something more.
Yes, they require what are known as special controls. These are specific measures tailored to the particular risks of that device type, going beyond of the basic regulatory requirements.
Special controls. Can you give an example? Like, what might that actually involve?
Sure. So, for instance, for an oximeter, a special control might be a mandatory performance standard dictating its accuracy under various conditions, or maybe specific labeling requirements, or even a requirement for post-market surveillance, like tracking patient outcomes.
Okay, so more tailored oversight for specific risks. What's the typical pre-market submission pathway for these moderate risk devices?
Most Class 2 devices typically require a pre-market notification, which is commonly known as a 510K submission.
10K, right.
This is where a manufacturer demonstrates substantial equivalence to a legally marketed device already on the market, a predicate device.
The substantial equivalent. So it doesn't have to be identical, but just as safe and effective.
Essentially, yes. You need to show it has the same intended use and similar technological characteristics. Or, if the characteristics are different, that those differences don't raise new questions of safety and effectiveness. It's about proving it performs comparably to something already cleared.
Okay. Can you give us some examples of Class 2 devices? What kind of technology falls into this moderate risk category?
Certainly. Common ones include things like powered wheelchairs or infusion pumps. Endoscopes are another big category.
Right.
More specialized examples are things like that oximeter we mentioned, which transmits radiation through blood to measure oxygen saturation, or an autotransfusion apparatus used to collect and reinfuse a patient's lost blood during surgery or trauma.
It's interesting how diverse the devices are within this single class. You know, from something very visible like a wheelchair to something highly technical like that autotransfusion device.
They really are. We also have automated differential cell counters for immature or abnormal blood cells. These often combine electronic particle counting or optical methods. In the dental world, a base metal alloy used for crown and bridge restorations is Class 2. Even Klebsiella serological reagents, used to identify Klebsiella bacteria from cultured isolates for diagnosis, fall into this class.
What about some of the newer, maybe more tech-driven examples? Ones that integrate software.
Good point. A self-fitting air conduction hearing aid, one that includes software allowing users to program it themselves. That's Class 2.
Ah, interesting.
Also, a telephone electrocardiograph transmitter and receiver, which conditions an ECG signal for transmission, or an electrocardiograph software device for over-the-counter use, one that creates and displays ECG data and can help identify arrhythmias, but importantly, not for actual diagnosis by the lay user. That's a key distinction.
Okay, not for diagnosis. And any implanted devices in Class 2.
Yes. For example, an elbow joint radial polymer prosthesis, so a partial elbow replacement, can fall into Class 2.
Right. Now, what happens if there's a truly novel device, something moderate risk, but there's just nothing like it already on the market? No predicate for that 510K comparison. How does the FDA handle that kind of innovation?
That's exactly where the de novo classification pathway comes in. It's specifically designed for novel, first-of-a-kind devices that are generally low to moderate risk, but have no existing predicate device.
Yeah, no.
So a manufacturer submits a de novo request. If granted, the FDA creates a new classification for that device type, classifying it as either Class 1 or Class 2, and establishes any necessary special controls right then and there.
Ah, so it sets the standard.
Exactly. Once that de novo is granted and the classification regulation is created, subsequent similar devices can then use the 510K pathway by referencing that newly classified device as their predicate.
I see. So it helps pave the way for future innovation by establishing a new benchmark. That makes sense.
It's a pathway specifically designed to bring truly new, but not necessarily high-risk technologies to market safely.
Okay, now what about the top tier, Class 3? These are the highest risk, right? What kind of devices are we talking about here, and what scrutiny do they face?
Correct. Class 3 devices pose the highest potential risk to patients. These are typically devices that are life-sustaining, life-supporting, or are implanted devices. Or they could just present a potential unreasonable risk of illness or injury.
Okay.
For these, general controls and even special controls are simply insufficient. They require the most rigorous level of regulatory review.
So what's the pre-market submission for Class 3? I'm guessing it's the most stringent, demanding a huge amount of data.
Absolutely. Most Class 3 devices require pre-market approval, or PMA.
PMA.
A PMA application involves the most stringent scientific and regulatory review by the FDA. It requires comprehensive data, non-clinical laboratory studies, animal studies, and crucially, clinical investigations involving human subjects to demonstrate safety and effectiveness.
So extensive clinical data is usually a must.
Almost always for PMA. The FDA needs robust evidence that the benefits outweigh the risks for these high-risk devices. They may even refer the PMA to an advisory panel of external experts for review and recommendation. It's a very thorough process.
Okay. What are some classic examples of Class 3 devices, the kind that really illustrate this high-risk profile?
Well, pacemakers and implantable heart valves are definitive Class 3 devices, life-sustaining implants.
Right.
Other examples include an implanted electrical urinary continence device intended to activate pelvic muscles or sphincters to treat incontinence, or a sorbent hemoperfusion system, which is used for treating specific conditions like hepatic coma or certain metabolic disturbances by filtering the blood.
And what about other implanted prostheses? You mentioned an elbow one was Class 2.
Right. The classification depends on the specific device and its risks. So, for example, a single-lumen silicone gel-filled breast prosthesis implanted for augmentation or reconstruction is Class 3. Also, a finger joint metal polymer constrained cemented prosthesis, or a hip joint metal constrained cemented or uncemented prosthesis. These are implanted joint replacements designed specifically to prevent dislocation, adding complexity and risk. They fall into Class 3.
Constrained. That sounds like a key factor there.
It often is. These are devices that live inside the body, often performing critical functions, so the risk profile demands the highest level of proof for safety and efficacy before they reach patients.
Makes sense. So once a device is defined, classified, and that regulatory pathway is clear, especially for these higher risk Class 2 and 3 devices, what about the human studies, the clinical trials? When do those come into play?
That brings us to investigational device exemptions, or IDEs. These are outlined in the regulations, specifically 21 CFR Part 812.
IDEs. Okay.
An approved IDE allows a device that would normally require pre-market approval or clearance, like a Class 3 device, or sometimes a Class 2 needing clinical data to be shipped lawfully for investigational purposes.
So it lets you test it in people.
Primarily, yes. It allows the sponsor to conduct clinical investigations on human subjects to gather the necessary safety and effectiveness data needed for that eventual PMA, or sometimes even a 510K or de novo.
And I imagine, similar to the device classes, not all device studies carry the same risk for the participants.
That's a key distinction the FDA makes. They differentiate between significant risk and non-significant risk device studies.
Okay, SR versus NSR.
Exactly. A significant risk, or SR device study, involves an investigational device that poses a potential for serious risk to the health, safety, or welfare of a subject. Think implants, devices supporting or sustaining life, or those used for diagnosing or curing serious conditions.
Right, high stakes.
For these SR studies, the sponsor or investigator must submit an IDE application directly to the FDA and get approval before starting the study. It's a very high bar, involving detailed protocols and safety monitoring plans.
And if it's not a significant risk device study, a non-significant risk, or NSR,
Then the study is considered to have IDE status without formal FDA submission, but it still requires approval and oversight from an institutional review board, or IRB.
the IRB still plays a crucial role.
Absolutely. Even without formal FDA IDE oversight for NSR studies, the basic principles of protecting participant safety, rights, and welfare, including informed consent, must be followed. The IRB ensures that. So while the pathway might differ slightly, patient safety is always paramount.
We've talked a lot in past deep dives about good clinical practice, or GCP, for pharmaceuticals, often referencing the ICH E6 guideline. Is there a similar standard specifically for device trials?
There is, and this is another key difference from the drug world. While pharma trials largely follow ICH E6, medical device clinical trials primarily adhere to ISO 1.55.20 Soigner for good clinical practice.
ISO 14155. Okay.
It's an international standard that covers device trial design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis, and reporting. The FDA recognizes this standard, so data gathered under ISO 14155 can support regulatory submissions in the U.S.
And the investigator's role? Still critical.
Hugely critical. The clinical investigator holds significant responsibility, not just for conducting the trial according to the plan, but for supervising the entire research team, ensuring participant safety, obtaining proper informed consent, and maintaining robust, accurate data integrity.
Okay, so we've gotten our device defined, classified, maybe run human trials under an IDE adhering to ISO 14155.
Right.
But the story of patient safety doesn't end when the device gets approved or cleared, right? The FDA's commitment to quality must extend throughout the entire life cycle.
Absolutely, it has to. And that's where the Quality System Regulation, or QSR, comes back into play in a big way. That's 21 CFR Part 820 again.
The device CGMP.
Exactly. It serves as the equivalent of current good manufacturing practices, but specifically for devices. It mandates a robust quality management system, or QMS.
QMS.
And this QMS has to encompass pretty much everything. Design, purchasing, manufacturing, packaging, labeling, storage, installation, servicing, and post-market activities. The goal is to ensure devices consistently meet their specifications and safety and effectiveness standards.
And is there an international standard that aligns with this QSR, maybe helps global manufacturers?
Yes. ISO 13485.20 Sunstein provides an internationally recognized framework for a medical device QMS. Many regulators around the world, including the FDA to a large extent, recognize or have harmonized their requirements with ISO 13485. It's really the global benchmark for device quality systems.
Okay, ISO 13485. So what are the most critical elements of this QMS, this quality system? Let's maybe start back at the beginning, how devices are designed and developed.
Design controls are absolutely fundamental. The QMS guides the whole design and development process through structured documentation and rigorous risk controls. This includes having detailed design plans up front.
And define what the device needs to do.
Precisely. That's covered by design inputs. These are all the physical and performance requirements. They come from user needs, regulatory requirements, industry standards, everything that dictates what the device must achieve.
And how do manufacturers make sure the design is actually going to work as intended before they, start making thousands of them?
That's where design verification and validation come in. Verification is about confirming that the design outputs the drawings, specifications meet the design inputs. Basically asking, did we design the device right? This usually involves tests, inspections, analyses.
Okay, verification. Did we design it right?
Then there's design validation. This ensures that the final finished device actually meets the user's needs and its intended uses. So asking, did we design the right device? This often involves testing under actual or simulated use conditions and very often includes data from clinical trials.
Right, validation. Did we design the right thing?
Exactly. And all of this history, the whole chronological story of the design process, is meticulously documented in a design history file, or DHF.
The DHF, the design story.
It's the full narrative, yes.
So the DHF is the design story. What are the actual how-to for manufacturing once the design is locked?
That's where the Device Master Record, or DMR, comes in. The DMR is essentially the definitive recipe or blueprint for manufacturing the device. It's derived directly from the design specifications in the DHF.
The recipe. Got it.
And for production and process controls, the QMS ensures devices are manufactured precisely according to that DMR recipe. This means documented instructions, standard operating procedures, SOPs for every step.
SOPs for everything.
Pretty much. It also includes stringent control over all the inspection, measuring, and test equipment used. And crucially, process validation.
Process validation. What's that?
That means establishing documented proof that a specific manufacturing process will consistently produce a product meeting its predetermined quality specifications. You have to prove your process works reliably every single time.
Prove the process. And I imagine keeping track of each individual device produced is vital, like a unique record for every unit.
Absolutely essential. A device history record, or DHR, must be maintained for each individual device, or sometimes each batch or lot.
The DHR.
This record contains all the details: the manufacturing dates, the quantity manufactured, the quantity released for distribution, all the acceptance records showing it met the DMR specifications. It's the individual device's production story, providing traceability.
It sounds like a lot of documentation. And what about all the equipment used in manufacturing? How does the QMS ensure that machinery itself is reliable and consistent?
Equipment management is critical. Every piece of equipment used from mixers to testing machines must meet specified requirements. It needs to be appropriately designed, constructed, placed, and installed in a way that facilitates maintenance, adjustment, cleaning, and proper use.
So it's not just about plugging it in.
Oh no. There's often a formal qualification process, sometimes called DQ, IQ, OQ, PQ design, installation, operational, and performance qualification. It's a multi-step process to rigorously prove that the equipment is designed correctly, installed right, operates as intended, and consistently performs as needed within the process.
Wow. DQ, IQ, OQ, PQ.
Plus, regular calibration against certified standards is crucial for measurement equipment. And proper preventative maintenance schedules are key. All of this calibration, maintenance, repairs needs meticulous documentation, usually in equipment logbooks. Risk management plays a role here too, informing things like cleaning procedures to prevent cross-contamination and setting those maintenance schedules.
It really sounds like the absolute mantra here is, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen, for the entire process.
It truly is the bedrock of the whole system. Documentation and record keeping are paramount under the QSR. Detailed records provide that complete, traceable history of how a product was designed, made, tested, released, everything.
Batch records, equipment logs.
Personnel training records, supplier evaluations, complaint files, audit reports. It's comprehensive. And in today's world, electronic records and signatures are common, governed by 21 CFR Part 11.
Part 11, right.
Which has its own stringent requirements for validation, audit trails, security, and ensuring data integrity based on principles often called ALCOA plus HUE.
L is COA plus yeah.
Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, plus complete, consistent, enduring, and available. It's all about ensuring the electronic data is trustworthy and reliable.
That's thorough. Okay, what about the labeling and packaging, the part the user actually sees? Are there strict QSR rules for that too?
Absolutely. Labeling and packaging fall under the QSR and also have their own specific regulation, 21 CFR Part 801. Labels need adequate directions for use, warnings, contraindications, and so on.
Clear information.
Yes, and they must comply with the Unique Device Identification, or UDI, rules for traceability throughout the supply chain. Labels have to be legible, securely affixed, and meticulously inspected for accuracy before any device is released for distribution. It's a critical control point.
UDI for traceability. Makes sense. Now, what if something goes wrong after a device is out on the market? How does the QMS handle that? Say, a safety issue emerges or customer complaints start coming in.
This is a critical part of the QMS post-market activities. Manufacturers must have robust procedures for identifying, investigating, and dealing with non-conforming products, whether caught internally or reported from the field.
Okay.
Crucially, they need solid systems for handling complaints. Complaints aren't just problems, they're valuable feedback that can identify potential quality issues or emerging risks. The investigation has to be thorough and documented.
And if a serious issue is found, a recall.
If a manufacturer initiates a correction or a removal action to reduce a health risk posed by a device or to remedy a violation of the Act, they generally have to submit a written report to the FDA under 21 CFR Part 806. Recalls themselves are classified by the FDA based on the severity of the potential health risk, Class I being the most serious, involving potential death or serious injury. That classification then guides the urgency and scope of the recall communication strategy.
Class, I recall, most serious. Got it. I've also heard about post-market surveillance, where companies might be required to actively monitor devices after approval. How does that fit into the QMS?
Right. Sometimes the FDA requires manufacturers to conduct post-market surveillance studies, often through what's called a 522 order under 21 CFR Part 822.
522 order.
This usually happens for higher-risk devices or when specific long-term questions remain after approval. It's about proactively monitoring the device's performance and safety in the real world across a broad patient population.
Okay, proactive monitoring.
And separate from that, but related, are the medical device reporting, or MDR, requirements under 21 CFR Part 803. Manufacturers and importers and device user facilities are required to report certain adverse events to the FDA,
What kind of incident?
particularly if they become aware of information suggesting that one of their devices may have caused or contributed to a death or serious injury, or if malfunction occurred that could lead to death or serious injury if it were to recur. It's about mandatory vigilance for safety signals.
Mandatory vigilance.
Yeah.
It really sounds like this whole quality management system isn't just about ticking boxes for compliance, but it's fundamentally designed for continuous improvement.
It absolutely is, or at least that's the goal when implemented effectively. A robust QMS supports continuous improvement in several ways. It standardizes processes, which reduces variability and human error.
Right.
It leverages tools like audits, internal audits, supplier audits, and preparing for regulatory inspections to provide an independent assessment of compliance and system effectiveness. Audits help identify potential risks or weaknesses before they cause major problems.
Catching things early.
Exactly.
Right.
And then there's the corrective and preventive action, or KPA system. KPA is crucial for investigating the root causes of problems, implementing effective corrections, and importantly, putting preventive measures in place to stop them from happening again. It's meant to be a cycle of identifying issues, fixing them, and learning from them to refine the system constantly.
A cycle of learning and refining. That makes sense. So that's the extensive U.S. landscape under the FDA and the QSR. But, medical devices are a global business. Are there international efforts to maybe harmonize regulations? Or are manufacturers just facing entirely different rule books everywhere they want to sell?
That's a great question. There are significant efforts towards harmonization, yes, but it's still a complex global tapestry. International bodies like the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, or IMDRF, work on developing converged regulatory practices. But different regions still have their own specific requirements. A major one, for example, is the European Union's medical device regulation, the EU MDR regulation 2017-745. It replaced older directives and now governs device approvals across the EU.
EU MDR. Okay, so how does that EU system compare to the FDA system we've been discussing? What are some of the key differences, maybe philosophical or practical, that manufacturers need to grasp if they're aiming for both U.S. and EU markets?
Well, one of the most fundamental differences is the regulatory body itself, or rather the structure. The EU uses what are called notified bodies.
Notified body.
Yes, these are independent, third-party organizations accredited by national competent authorities. They are the ones who actually audit the manufacturer's quality management system, review the technical documentation for most devices, and assess conformity with the MDR requirements. If everything checks out, they issue the CE mark certificate.
So it's third-party auditors doing the review, not the government agency directly like the FDA.
For most devices, yes. This contrasts sharply with the FDA's model, where FDA's own scientists and reviewers conduct that centralized scientific review of the pre-market submission, like the 510(k) or PMA.
That's a huge difference in approach.
It really is. In Europe, getting that CE mark indicates compliance and allows marketing across the EU member states. This difference means manufacturers often need different strategies for engaging with regulators interacting with multiple notified bodies versus interacting centrally with the FDA.
Okay. What about classification? You mentioned class 1, 2 for FDA. Is it similar in the EU?
It's similar in concept risk-based, but with some key differences in the details. The EU uses four main classes: Class 1, lowest risk; Class C, Class IB, and Class 3, highest risk.
Four classes: I, IA, IB.
Right, and the specific classification rules can differ. For example, under EU MDR, many devices previously in lower classes got up-classified. And something like a sterile Class I device in Europe often requires notified body involvement for the sterility aspects, making its pathway look a bit more like a Class 2 device pathway in the US context. So you can't just assume your FDA class translates directly.
You really have to assess classifications separately for each region.
Absolutely critical for a global launch strategy.
And what about the pre-market review process itself? What's the main difference there beyond the notified body versus FDA staff aspect?
Under the EU MDR, for most devices above Class 1, the notified body review focuses heavily on the manufacturer's technical documentation, proving the device meets safety and performance requirements in their quality management system, often including that ISO 13485 audit. The emphasis is really on ensuring the manufacturer can consistently produce a safe and effective device and verifying the clinical evidence supporting it.
Consistent production and clinical evidence.
Yes, and the EU MDR significantly increased the requirements for clinical evidence for almost all devices, even established ones. Now, contrast that with the FDA's pre-market review. A 510K is focused on that substantial equivalence comparison. A PMA is a deep scientific dive into the device's specific data by FDA's own experts. While a QMS inspection happens eventually, and often pre-PMA approval, it isn't always the primary focus of the initial 510K clearance decision itself.
So different focus points in the review. EU, maybe more QMS-centric upfront for CE marking. FDA, more data equivalence-centric for clearance approval.
That's a reasonable simplification, yes. Both demand strong data and quality systems, but the review structure and emphasis can feel quite different. Manufacturers really need to understand both systems thoroughly if they plan to operate globally.
Wow. Okay. We've really covered a lot of ground here,
Yeah.
digging into the intricate world of medical device regulation. From the FDA's core definition, that crucial difference from drugs,
Right, the physical versus chemical action.
to the fundamental risk-based classification system, class 1, 2, and 3, and how those decisions really ripple through the entire development life cycle.
Dictating the testing, the clinical trials needed, the submission pathway.
Yeah, you've really shown that classifying a device isn't just some administrative step you check off. It's a truly strategic foundation for everything that follows.
Absolutely. And I think understanding this landscape really highlights the immense effort and the rigorous standards that go into every medical device you might encounter.
Yeah.
It helps ensure that the tools we rely on for our health, from the simplest tongue depressor you mentioned, right up to the most complex implanted heart valve, are reviewed for safety, effectiveness, and reliability. It's kind of an unspoken promise of quality and patient safety woven into the fabric of this industry.
An unspoken promise. I like that. So thinking ahead then, what does this all mean for the future? But technology isn't standing still. We're seeing more software integration, artificial intelligence, personalized medicine approaches getting built into devices.
Huge changes happening.
Right. So how do you think regulators like the FDA or their counterparts globally will need to adapt these classification systems and their oversight models? How do they keep pace with that rapid innovation while still maintaining the highest standards of safety and efficacy?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. What new categories or maybe regulatory pathways might need to emerge, especially as those lines between medical devices, wellness products, and consumer tech continue to blur? It seems like a really fascinating and critical challenge for the future of healthcare regulation.
It absolutely is. Keeping safety paramount while enabling beneficial innovation, that's the ongoing balancing act.